One gunshot, one battle that changed the course of history. Centuries later, that sound still echoes through the lives of the American people. The Battle of Fallen Timber.
After the Revolutionary War, the United States of America found itself on its own, ready to prove their strength in newfound nationalism. They turned to the uncharted Ohio Territory to fulfill their destiny, replete with abundant farmland and fur trade, and only one obstacle, the Indians. General Josiah Harmer was the first to campaign against the Native Americans in order to capture their territorial claims in the Ohio area. He lost over 200 men and ultimately united the Miami, Shawnee, Ottawa, and Delaware tribes. This failure led President George Washington to appoint Major General Arthur St. Clair to the position. After another devastating defeat resulting in the loss of over half his men, Washington demoted St. Clair, appointing in 1787 the victorious Revolutionary War general from Pennsylvania, Anthony Wayne.
Washington, excuse me, said, well, how about Anthony Wayne? And a lot of the other people said, oh, you're crazy. We'll put that man in charge. Mad Anthony? All kinds of things have happened. But Mad Anthony was the right man for the job.
Wayne was faced with a difficult task. It was rumored that the British and Spanish armies would aid the Indians in their next battle. And in fact, the British had already started to provide the Indians with necessary weapons and tactics. On August 20th, 1794, Wayne drew his troops into the Ohio wilderness where 1,100 Indians awaited them. Wayne was called on to save the nation, and he did it.
August 20th, 1794. This day the Legion, after depositing every kind of baggage, took up the line of march at 7 o'clock and continued their route down the margin of the river.
The Americans met the Indians in a clearing scattered with fallen timbers from an earlier windstorm. The U.S. Army was well equipped with flintlock muskets, and the Indians' weapons ranged from Ottawa war clubs to rifles and small muskets. The Indians planned to attack the Americans' left wing, but Wayne shouted out orders, and after a time of shooting came a line of infantry, bayonets held high, charging straight towards the enemy. The Indians reacted with fear as the Americans hollered, shooting down the rebels as they dashed from the clearing towards safety. However, not a single Indian gained protection from the treacherous discharge of the white guns. Their defenders, the British, no longer offered their aid to the Indians. Instead, they locked their fort, forever ending the hope of protection. The battle was over, 33 Americans killed, 100 wounded, with the Indians losing twice that amount. Wayne wrote to Secretary of War Henry Knox,
"The loss of the enemy was more than double to that of the Federal Army. The woods were strewed for a considerable distance with the dead bodies of Indians."
However, the result wasn't just a matter of deaths and numbers. Instead, it marked a turning point in American history, leading to the creation of the United States' first permanent national army, as well as preventing farther damage by the Whiskey Rebellion, a major threat to the Union. The battle changed Indian, British, and American relations and increased westward expansion to the fertile lands of the Ohio. Prior to the Battle of Fallen Timbers, Congress decided to disband a regular American army due to the fact that many politicians saw an army as a possible threat to congressional power. Preceding the battle, Washington supported the formation of the United States Army during peacetime. Another stunning defeat to the Native Americans, Congress finally conceded, allowing Washington to form the Legion of the United States. However, not all of the Jeffersonian politicians in Congress were convinced. If the Battle of Fallen Timbers was another loss, the army would be dissolved. The general wrote to Knox,
It is with infinite pleasure that I now announce to you the brilliant success of the Federal Army under my command.
Wayne's victory was then used to convince Congress to extend the life of the Legion for another 3 years. Americans had lost nearly all their faith in the quality of the entire military, and many, especially Western settlers, feared for their safety. Not only did Wayne's win ignite a nationwide spark of hope, it provided a turning point for the foundation of a successful future army and a greater American defense. The United States government levied a tax on whiskey in order to increase funds for the national government. However, it was the vexation of many frontier Pennsylvania farmers whose main revenue was this very industry. Starting on July 15, 1794, they rose in protest, rioting and killing revenue officers. It wasn't simply the unfair tax that ignited their fury, but also the resentment of the federal government's lack of protection against Indian massacres in the area. However, with Wayne's victory at Fallen Timbers, the rebels' complaints were squelched. Wayne's victory proved to the Western settlers that the American army could provide their desired protection from the Indians. Wayne's success at Fallen Timbers proved to be a major turning point and spread hope and unity throughout America, saving the fate of this newborn nation.
What can be considered one of those most vital turning points is the change Wayne brought to the American, Indian, and British relations. The United States had been fighting an informal war with the tribes in the Ohio region for over 20 years. There were several vicious massacres killing more than 1,500 whites, which led to more settler protests for retaliation. However, those attempts at vengeance were failures. The Indians fought gallantly for the lands they had obtained for centuries. The unofficial leader of these rebels was Little Turtle, a master at hit-and-run warfare. After the loss to the whites at Fallen Timbers, Little Turtle and the Indians finally signed a treaty seceding their land, forever changing relations with the Americans. The treaty forced evacuation of the Native Americans from the fertile Ohio Valley. Not only did they leave their homes, but part of their culture and traditional values disappeared. The Indians, caught in the web of competition for territory, lost their way of life. A key reason why the Indians failed lies in their complex relationship with the English Empire. British traders were urged to promote Indian attacks against American settlers. Their government even supplied goods and fighting tactics. Their reasons were not altruistic, but rather lay in the British efforts to protect their fur trade with the Native Americans. After the loss at Fallen Timbers, the British no longer allowed the Indians in their forts and ended their aid. Even the Americans realized the change in their relations. A soldier commented,
I have no doubt we shall be able to bring the Indians to terms. I think their friends will leave them by what we learned from a prisoner that was taken. He says they quarreled much and fired upon each other.
Not only were the Americans focused on the transformed link between the British and Indians, but they themselves were changing relations with the English. Subsequent to the Revolutionary War, the Treaty of Paris had declared that all British forts must be evacuated. However, the orders were not followed, and more American settlers became aggravated over the continued occupation of their lands. But with the win at Fallen Timbers came two treaties that would finally implement the evacuation and allow the dream of westward expansion to be fulfilled.
Arouse the Indians and supply them with weapons and ammunition and so forth. But once so Washington, meanwhile, while this whole thing was going on with General Wayne and the Indians, Washington had a representative in England negotiating a treaty with the British, sort of a second peace treaty almost after the Revolution, in which they agreed, among other things, to evacuate these forts. And whether they would have done it or not if Wayne had lost is a good question.
The primary cause for conflicts in the Northwest Territory lay in the Americas' desire for land expansion. After finally gaining independence from England, the United States was eager to expand, something the British Empire refused to allow. However, they were unsuccessful in conquering territory until the win at Fallen Timbers. Soon after Wayne defeated the leader, Little Turtle, and other Indians, he pushed for a treaty that would formally recognize American territorial gains.
We have various accounts from Greenville, headquarters of General Anthony Wayne. By some we are told that the Indians are coming into the treaty. We know our friends the British will spare no pains to frustrate any design which may be serviceable to the United States.
The Treaty of Greenville ceded 2/3 of what became Ohio, allowing it to become the first Northwestern state in 1803, while also contributing to parts of 5 other states. The United States began to emerge from the Northwest conflict as a larger and more unified nation. They no longer were confined to the eastern seaboard, but rather spread their democratic ideals and way of life further into uncharted territory.
The arms of the United States had been vindicated from the shame of defeat and disaster. It was the beginning of an era of peace and prosperity for the whole Ohio country.
These